Hi, I'm Mr. Hutchings, and this is Mr. Hutchings History. This episode is the environmental consequences of connectivity, Unit 2.6 of the AP World History Program. The skills we'll focus on will be making connections, and our themes will be humans and the environment. Giovanni Boccaccio, who lived through the Black Death, opened the Decameron, a book he wrote, with the words, "Dead bodies filled every corner." That was not a metaphor, that was a city in crisis. The same routes that moved silk, pepper, and ideas also moved pathogens. You're in Florence, 1348. How might plague change how we view merchants, travelers, or strangers in a market? If you're thinking fear, you're right. In fact, it was fear of outsiders. Gates to cities became closed. There were quarantines. Tension emerged between economic need and public health. Today, how connectivity reshaped environments by moving crops, stressing ecosystems, and spreading disease. We'll practice making connections across regions and causes. There were crops on the move. We picture luxury goods, but the most transformative cargo was often plants. New staples reshaped diets, demography, land use, and labor. Champa rice, feeding an empire. From what is now Vietnam, Champa rice was fast ripening and resilient to drought and flood. Offered as tribute to the Song state, it was deliberately distributed across China. There was terracing and irrigation, which expanded. Hillsides often became green staircases. There was double cropping, which boosted surpluses. Population surged past 100 million in China. Cities multiplied. People migrated south into new rice belts. One crop rewrote China's demographic map. Let's look at bananas. From Indonesia to Africa. Originating in Southeast Asia, bananas crossed the Indian Ocean with Indonesian seafarers to Madagascar, then into the African mainland. Nutrient dense, reliable calories led to population growth. It supported Bantu expansion into new ecological zones. Landscapes changed. Orchards, forest clearance, garden agriculture. Let's look at cotton, sugar, and citrus, the Islamic crop package. With Islamic expansion came a crop suite. Cotton led to textile booms from Persia to Al-Andalus. Sugarcane from Southeast Asia led to irrigated estates around the Mediterranean. Sweetness shifted from luxury to craving. Citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, limes, took root around the Mediterranean. Diets, cuisines, and vitamin intake changed. There's a long arc. Europe's sugar obsession later fuels American plantation systems and coerced labor. Why do staples and cash crops, rice and sugar, generate deeper, longer term change than luxuries like silk? It's because of calories. Calories and commodities shape where people live, how they work, and how states tax, not just what elites display. Imagine your village doubling its harvest, bellies full, infants surviving, towns swelling, or tasting sugar for the first time, so desirable that empires will fight for it. Between 1200 to 1450, crops like champa rice, bananas, cotton, sugar, and citrus didn't just travel, they reorganized economies, landscapes, and labor systems. Which changed the world more? Rice, which led to mass population and growth, bananas, which changed African demography, or sugar, which changed labor and created plantations. There isn't one right answer, but you can trace the ripples. More food and people also meant more pressure on land. Environmental degradation is just a fact in this period. Wealth and growth brought ecological strain, deforestation, soil exhaustion, overgrazing, and climate shocks. In Great Zimbabwe, prosperity from gold and ivory trade increased cattle herds. Overgrazing degraded grasslands. Soils declined, which led to eventual abandonment late in the 1400s. In feudal Europe, clearing forests for fields and fuel led to deforestation, erosion, shrinking yields, and vulnerability to famine and plague. During the Little Ice Age, from about 1300 to 1800, cooler temperatures, shorter growing seasons led to more crop failures, more social unrest, and price spikes. In Mesoamerica, the classic Maya, population growth plus deforestation plus drought cycles led to agricultural stress and urban decline. We could look at how we make connections here. We see a reoccurring cycle. Innovation leads to population growth, leads to resource strain, leading to environmental decline, and finally leading to collapse or adaptation. Let's do a walkthrough. The innovation was Champa rice or bananas. The growth is population swells in Hangzhou or Bantu migrations in Africa expand. The strain, Europe's forests are cut. Zimbabwe's pastures are overused. Maya fields are exhausted. The decline, erosion, barren soils, famine, little ice age intensifies stress. And the outcomes, the abandonment of Zimbabwe, demographic contraction of the Maya, unrest and reordering in Europe. The most dramatic environmental effect wasn't erosion, it was epidemic disease. The Black Death, origins and highways of its spread. The bubonic plague emerged in 14th century East Asia. Fleas on rats, rats on grain carts and ships. The Mongols secured silk roads and dense ports became express lanes. Caravanserai, perfect for rest and exchange, were also perfect for fleas to jump hosts. Connectivity made prosperity and plague travel faster. The scale, China and Central Asia, tens of millions dead from 1330s to 1340s. In Europe, when the Black Death arrived in 1347, one-third of its population, about 25 to 30 million people, were dead by 1351. In the Islamic world, there were massive population losses. Cairo perhaps lost half of its population in a peak wave. The total Afro-Eurasian deaths from 1330 to about 1400 is estimated between 75 million to 200 million deaths. The range reflects the sources you use. Less direct integration shielded some regions initially, but no region was fully immune. There were social and economic shocks. Labor scarcity led to survivors gaining more bargaining power for their labor. Wages rose. Mobility increases as people now could move to find work. Feudal ties weaken in Europe. Some serfs leave estates. Formerly being bound to the land, now they have the ability to leave. Cities in Europe recruit workers. There's a short-term collapse in production, but a long-term rebalancing of power toward labor. The cultural and political responses, well, in Europe, art and literature reflected the danse macabre, plague frescoes, and Boccaccio's Decameron. Faith, flagellants, people who hit themselves as a penance, versus disillusionment, people who started questioning the faith. These people questioned church authorities and accelerated later currents of people challenging established religious leaders in Europe. There was scapegoating, anti Jewish pogroms, such as the Strasbourg in 1349. Eastward Jewish migrations reshaped settlement patterns. In the Islamic world, in theology, plague was seen as a test. There was a hadith framing martyrdom for the patient, resilience through communal ritual. The economy was affected. Rural areas were depopulated. There were disruptions in markets. And religious authority in the Islamic world was largely reaffirmed. In China, under Yuan or Mongol rule, the Black Death crisis deepened illegitimacy. There was a collapse in tax collection and an increase in rebellions. A group called the Red Turbans blended Buddhist prophecy and anti Mongol sentiment into revolt. The Zhu Wangzhang founds the Ming Dynasty in 1368, which will challenge Mongol rule. Here, plague fuels dynastic change more than religious crisis. So let's make some connections. Same pathogens, different lenses. In Europe, faith was shaken and minorities targeted. In the Islamic world, the difficult trial was endured by the people. In China, it led to political turnover. Connectivity explains the how, culture explains the response. Were wage gains and weakened serfdom a silver lining? Or how do human costs outweigh benefits? Well, economically transformative, it was ethically devastating. Societies would have traded gains for lives lost. How did people at the time make sense of the catastrophe? Well, we can listen to their voices. Ibn Khaldun from the Maghrib, devastated nations, populations vanished. He sees civilizations unraveling, fields empty, and towns silent. Ibn Battuta from Damascus notes mass prayers and community rituals. He saw faith as action, not paralysis. Gabriele de Musis of Italy tells the story of the siege of Kaffa, where corpses were hurled over the wall to further the siege by demoralizing and spreading disease to those defenders. It reveals a European impulse to blame outsiders, regardless of accuracy. Gilles Limusis, which is French, and I'm sure I probably said that incorrectly, saw the plague as reflecting our universal mortality. Mongols, Muslims, Christians alike, human frailty before God. So let's make some connections. Together, these sources show plague as biological and cultural, faith, blame, grief, policy, all traveling the same routes as goods. Let's practice connecting regions, causes, and outcomes. So connections link cause to effect, comparisons, and continuities and changes across space. So for yourself, if you're listening to this, write 1 to 2 sentences. One on China and Africa. How did new crops alter population and landscapes in both? And another sentence for Europe and Central Asia. How did trade networks transmit both prosperity and plague? Some sample responses. Champa rice doubled Chinese harvests and fueled urban growth. Bananas enabled Bantu expansion. Both show new crops led to population rise, leading to land use changes. Across Eurasia, trade spread luxury goods and pathogens. The Black Death's labor shocks show how the same networks deliver boom and bust. Wrap with the big picture. Between 1200 and 1450, connectivity carried staples that fed millions, cash crops that built industries, and diseases that shattered societies. Human solutions, terraces, irrigation, caravans, ports, unlocked prosperity but stressed ecosystems. The story is a paradox. Connection multiplies benefits and risks. To wrap up, why don't you write 3 sentences? One new crop and its effect, one example of environmental degradation, one social economic effect of the Black Death. Next up, the economic consequences of connectivity, credit, currencies, and production systems in a more connected world. Until then, stay curious. History matters.